Hello, everyone. My name is Eric Owens. I am the president of the American Distilling Institute. I have a few early announcements and some business to take care of, and then I will introduce the panelists and we will get on to our conversation about chamber stills. Right now is our spirits competition registration. Early bird registration is still for about 2 more weeks. And yeah, I have so many things to say about it. We have a ton of you have opportunities if you win, if you get to the best in class of, meetings with distributors and retailers. And yeah, so that's going on now. We have our conference coming up in San Antonio, August 25th and 26th. And Alexandre Gabriel will actually be our keynote speaker, and he's on this webinar with us today as well. We will also be continuing this conversation in San Antonio live in person. So, yeah, this will be, I guess, I just sort of thought of this. This is sort of part one, and part two will be in person in a few months. So, next Friday, not this Friday, the Friday afterwards, the 31st, we have the San Francisco Bay Area Bottle Share. So, hoping to get together and share some spirits with all of you who are in the San Francisco Bay Area. Today, we will be talking about the chamber still. And for me, the chamber still really came on to my perspective with Leopold Brothers. And it turns out that there's actually there's a chamber still which has been in operation since the 1930s, I believe, at the West Indies Rum Company. So I had the pleasure recently of going and visiting that distillery and seeing all the amazing projects, such as the 650-acre farm and the farm that grows the coconuts for their rum, and seeing that chamber and being able to taste the distillate coming off of that still. And it's a very unique experience. And there's between that and the Leopold, and then I've also been talking to Matt Strickland for the last few years, and since he moved over to Iron City Distilling and also has installed a chamber still, and I believe that is running hopefully as we speak. And yeah, the last panelist here. So we have Alexandre Gabriel, we have Matt
Hi.
Strickland, and we have Royce Neeley. And Royce Neeley is with the Neeley Family Distillery. He's about an hour outside of Louisville and part of those Kentucky distillers. So we have about an hour and a half for this conversation, and we do mean for this to be an interactive discussion. So they have some questions. They're going to go through and ask questions of each other as well. But you as attendees, please put your questions into the chat, and then the moderator will Matt Strickland will be the moderator of the discussion, and we will let him know there are questions to be answered. And with that, welcome all. And here you go, Matt.
All right. Hey, thank you, everybody. I see a lot of familiar names on the attendees list. So I really appreciate everybody joining us. This is a really exciting discussion for all three of us. As Eric mentioned, some of you know me, but for those of you who don't, I've been a bit of a hired gun over the years and worked at a number of distilleries. My most recent project is just outside of Pittsburgh with Iron City Distilling. And when we started that project up, I was the lead distillery consultant on it. And then eventually got hired to run the place. There was a lot of discussion about exactly what we were going to do, and the topic, of course, ran towards a very historically accurate Monongahela style rye, and part of that equation became a chamber still. And so we had approached Vendome a couple of years ago about commissioning one, and it was actually the second one they had built. Obviously, the first one they had built was 2015, 2016-ish for Leopold Brothers out in Colorado. And we looked at it as, since Western PA was kind of where these stills really made their name, particularly in the second half of the 19th century. We were sort of bringing the three chamber home, so to speak. So this was when we were asked to do this, and obviously, Alexandre with the West Indies Rum Company has a very unique chamber still, and I'll let him kind of speak to that. And Royce is also installing one, hopefully this year, fingers crossed. And his will be the first in Kentucky in well over 100 years, I believe.
As far as we could tell, since the 1880s.
Yeah, so that's because this is one thing that I really hope that people get out of this discussion, is that for those of you that have read and heard about chamber stills over the past few years, there's a lot of interesting things that have been said about them, but the history goes a lot deeper than maybe some of you may be familiar with. And chamber stills are not really just one thing. It's not just the three chamber, for instance. Alexandre will talk about his, which is not technically a three chamber. It's a very unique piece. And some of the diagrams we may put up, you'll kind of notice some differences. And we'll talk about running one, and some of the history, but yeah, Kentucky, I think three chambers were, people associated them with Pennsylvania, but turns out that people in Kentucky use them as well, not to the same extent, but there's this really unique history there. So let me start this out. We kind of did a test run with this webinar like last week, and it was hilarious because I think we got through one question in an hour. So we'll see there's just a lot to say about it. So this is hopefully going to be a lot of fun. So let me ask you guys, Royce and Alexandre, and I'll chime in with my reasoning, but what first really drew your attention to the chamber still? What attracted you to the idea of running one? Adding it to your distillery's toolkit, so to speak. I don't know who wants to go first. Royce, you want
Sure.
Because you're on the top of my screen.
Yeah, absolutely. So for us, it really just made sense. And I know like you said, we discussed this a week ago, but I love the pot still. I love the nuances and flavor that a pot still can create. And I sat down and was, talking with my father, who's my business partner. And I've been out to Leopold's. Todd is a fantastic guy. The godfather, but to me, the godfather of the three chamber, definitely the revival of the three chamber. So, you got to give credit where credit's due with the, Todd really, bringing this thing back, at least to American whiskey. And, I was talking to my dad about it and kind of the flavors that I thought it could produce. And I tried some of Todd's different distillates off of his regular pot still versus the three chamber. And we just felt like, it's time for Kentucky to have one back in the bluegrass. And I wanted to be the first one to be able to bring that back. So that was my reasoning behind it. But there's so much you can do with it. We're at a really cool time. There's manuals, there's a lot of information about how to run a column still, how to run a pot still, but there's really not much out there on the three chamber. And, we're so lucky to get to be in a time where, we get to write and explore and, really teach people how to run this type of still. And I'm thoroughly excited about being able to do that.
No, that's fantastic. Alexandre, obviously you're a pretty unique case here.
It's funny that Royce talks about pot still and love for pot still. I just grew up, in pot stills. And to me, making cognac and all this, where the cognac guys, and if you make cognac and you use a Collins still and you're found out, you go in jail, you go to jail for 5 months, and nobody wants that, right? And don't believe that the French jails you eat foie gras and drink sauterne. I never tried, but we are not being tempted whatsoever. So it's just that whole culture for 500 years in cognac with the pot still, and And I studied I'm a master blender and a distiller, so I've studied, the different equipments, and I read about the chamber still. And to me, and you hear this from a French guy, to me, the chamber still, and remember what you said, Matt, chamber stills were 2 chambers, 3 chambers, 4 chambers,
Yeah.
5 chambers. And it's the American genius. This is, to me, it is to distilling. The chamber still is to distilling what jazz is to music. It's an old Americana genius. It's something that's different, that just was born in America. I mean, if you think about, and interestingly enough, it's a technology that actually, and it's a technology, we'll talk about the taste profiles, and that actually designs it to a certain taste profile. And it's a very, you could make one of wood. I don't know if everybody knows, but a lot of them were made of wood. And actually, I've got a bunch of Coopers and Cognac and stuff. I want to eventually make one of wood, and they all rotted out. But the ones in now, back to 1996, I'm visiting Barbados and Stade's West Indies Rum Distillery, which is a very storied, for technicians, very storied. Was established in 1893 by like a coppersmith, so with 40 patents. So it's a very technical distillery that grew in the 1970s to stay alive. When rum with characters were not so hot, when people wanted to do lighter things. But luckily, it continued making, very flavorful rums. And it had, one day I'm visiting this distillery, first time really, 1996, I had launched Plantation, now Planetary, and I see a chamber still, and it's distilling, and it's making rum. And if you've been to Barbados, it's a very subdued culture and stuff, so nobody's a bragger, and so I'm there, and I'm like, right, the guy was right. The guy said, this is a chamber still, right? Imagine you've studied dinosaurs, and you go to somebody's garden, and you see a little T-Rex hopping in the background. And you're like, is that a dinosaur? And the guy says, yeah, it's a T-Rex. What do you know about T-Rex? And it was there, and it was alive, and it was kicking. And I was like, wow, this is a chamber still. So what do you know? The French, what do you know about chamber stills? It's no Americana. And I don't know if you know, but in the 1700s, 1600s, there was strong relationship between America and the Caribbeans. I think some of the first governors of South Carolina are from Barbados, and so on and so forth. So it's a strong relationship, cultural. So it's very easy. And the brand is, and so now fast forward, I've discovered that marvel. I love that distillery to death. Imagine I'm just, French, farmer making cognac and blending rum. And my dream was to be involved in rum distilling and all the possibilities. I thought maybe West Indies. So fast forward about 8 years, 10 years ago, we purchased West Indies Rum, States West Indies Rum Distillery. And that still had been put to sleep, in the 2001. It stopped distilling. First thing we want to do is like, let's put it back to work. And I'm traveling, I was just at the distillery, and I'm looking on internet that the brand, it's engraved on it, it's Vulcan. So I'm like, okay, Vulcan, America. And I know, Matt, you're familiar with Vulcan, but Vulcan is kind of disappeared from the screens, right? As a company.
Yeah, it really has. Yeah,
it really has, right? And it's very historical. I know if you travel in New Orleans, you see a lot of metal work from 19th century. That's Vulcan. I look on internet and I look for Vulcan, and the only thing I find, don't believe everything you see on internet, by the way, is the Vulcan people, and it's Spock doing this with his hands, and that's all I find, man. And my son, who's being trained, and he's like, of course, it's a still from outer space, and so it's we're there, and I'm like, okay, we're gonna make it work. And remember what Royce was saying was the that see Vulcan distilling. Thank you, man. And so that's part of the still. So you see Vulcan distilling, evaporation, Cincinnati. That's all we got. You see the chambers and stuff. And so, by the way, it looks nice now and stripped, but it was painted by like 30 quotes of paint, and so we stripped it and varnished it. And to finish on this, I was just saying, would be great to work it out. And there's like, man, it was really leaking last time we used it in 2001. So I said, we can fix it, and how we're going to work this. And luckily, there's a gentleman at the distillery called Digger Henderson. And Digger's been going to the distillery and distilling for 45 years. And his father was a distiller at the same distillery as Stade, West Indies. And I invite everybody here. I know Royce is coming to Barbados to see it. And his father was a distiller at the distillery for 47 years. So when you speak with Digger, you speak to more than 90 years of Barbados rum making. So I'm like, Digger, you think we can make that one work again? And he's like, sure, Alexander, but we gotta, so we have a coppersmith from Cognac that know how to fix old stills, and they welded the pieces, reworked on them, and so on. What you see, and so we fixed it. And first drop was 2017. That first drop for us was like, discovering something super new, because that was rum. It was purchased by West Indies from America at a time that West Indies rum Stades was producing more and more Navy rum. Here is a different. So Digger is the shorter man in the middle. He's holding a picture of his father, by the way, that taught him. Digger, he's a cricketer. He loves cricket, and he said the first time he came to the distillery with his father, he was not taller than the grass. And sure, the grass Barbados is a bit tall, but not that tall. So he's a kid. And the still you see in the background is a different one. That was a still built in 1780. You can see the elephant trunk. So this is another still that we fixed. So I was fascinated by it, and I'm like, okay, we're gonna start making rum with it. And since then, we've been making rum, and as we speak, it's making rum. And in that case, and we'll discuss taste profiles and things. It is actually, remember what Matt was saying, there's different type of stills. This is a 2 distilling chamber stills, and the ones you guys are talking about are 3. So ours is a more primitive expressions of a still, and it's got a reflux system with what Eric showed you, or Matt, I'm sorry, Matt, was actually an air cooling reflux system that actually uses the wind from the beach, to just cool down, and make a reflux system. And the reflux system was actually recycled from a still that was built. You see that gray thing over there? You see the holes and the tubes, actually the air going through. So that's a reflux system in there, and we'll talk about it, what we do about it. But sorry to have been a little bit long. I apologize, but I just wanted to give you the perspective and how we came to that still. And I think it's almost 100 years, and it's been making a delicious rum. It went to sleep for a little bit, but it's kicking again. And that little dinosaur is making beautiful, beautiful, very thick rum. We'll discuss a little later.
Thank you. That's awesome. Yeah. So, speaking for Iron City Distilling, the story was a bit circuitous. As I said earlier, I started out as a consultant on the project and not really knowing I just knew they wanted to do rye whiskey. I didn't know what the brand was going to be like, or, what the story would be and things like that. And I remember they hired me onto the project, and I asked them, I said, well, what exactly is it that you guys have in mind? And because that was never made particularly clear to me when I was sort of designing the space, which, as any consultants and the attendees list will tell you, it's that can be kind of fun, but it can be a little frustrating too. And and the response I was given was, well, we were just kind of hoping you would figure it out, which is great because you get sort of a long leash. But a leash can quickly become a noose if you're not careful. So I was standing around thinking. I was talking with the project manager, and this was a few months before we started production. We had this 1,500 gallon pot still put in place, and all these fermenters, and we were starting to source barrels and grain and all this stuff. And I was talking with the project manager, and I said, I probably would have done this a little bit differently if I had known it was going to be me. And he said, oh, well, how do you mean? I said, well, I probably would have installed a chamber still, because I had at that point decided that I really wanted to go down this path of trying to come as close as possible to the original, sort of second half of the 19th century, pre-Prohibition style, Pennsylvania style rye. And not that you have to have a chamber still in order to make that, but it was an interesting part of the equation. So I didn't really think much of the comment. And then a few days later, end up having a meeting with the owner, and he said, "Oh, I heard you would have added one of these stills in." And I said, "Yeah, I would have, but it's all good." And he's like, "Well, why don't you get one priced out? Let's see what happens." And I don't know, it was a very off the cuff kind of thing, but I said, "Oh, okay." I don't think it's going to be cheap, but we did that, and before I knew it, we were ordering one, and and this really came about. Of course, I had Royce talked a bit about giving credit where credit's due. Todd Leopold really got the ball rolling in this part of the distilling world, and his whiskey is fantastic. It's exciting, and we wanted to kind of put our own spin on it and play a part of that history. And we really wanted to, as I was saying to the guys earlier, we really wanted to bring the three chamber back home to Pennsylvania. And the challenging thing is, and this will be the next question we talk about, but the challenging thing was figuring out how to run it, because there are really only a handful of people in the world that know how to run one of these things. And so trying to find information, it's not, as Royce was saying earlier, there's all sorts of information out there about running a column still and a pot still, and a lot of people have written stuff about it and so on and so forth. But the oldest manual, so to speak, of running a three chamber is over 100 years old at this point. So trying to go back in history and dig through some of these old documents, and and of course I started with a lot of the stuff that I had seen Todd Leopold reference in some of the interviews and articles written about what he was doing, but then also talking with historians. Some of you may be familiar with Laura Fields. She's up in Pennsylvania along with Sam Komlenik, copy editor for Whiskey Advocate, and also a Pennsylvania whiskey historian in his own right. And talking with both of them, I was able to uncover a lot of extra stuff. And then, going down a lot of different rabbit holes, sometimes winding up in just bizarre dead ends. But every now and then you get just like a little kernel. And it was sort of, you found yourself sort of reading between the lines and trying to piece parts of the puzzle together, like looking at there was a description from, I think it was a paper by Adams back in 1910, where he talks about the incoming steam pressure in these things, and it was between 4 and 5 psi, and that told us, like, oh, okay, so we have to run it this way. And so it was, there were just, and we're still trying to figure a lot of stuff out, but we've been running ours for over 6 months now. We've been incredibly pleased with it. And as Alexandre says, it is kind of like jazz, but there's, I tell people there's not a lot of finesse to it necessarily either. It is like taking, it's like taking a sledgehammer when a little ball peen hammer would do the trick. But you really can't make distillate, in my opinion, any other way. So the next thing I think we should probably talk about is how you run one of these things. And I'll kind of start with some of that. So for those of you who are not, because a lot of people are, I think we get asked questions about this all the time. How do you actually operate the thing? You have to understand that the way these things work, they distill under high pressure. We've probably all read stories about, gin distilleries or shochu distilleries using distillation systems under a vacuum and distilling under negative pressure. And that reduces the boiling point. I mean, we tend to think of boiling point in terms of just temperature, but obviously pressure has a just as much impact on the boiling point of a liquid as temperature does. So when we talk about some of this vacuum distillation, they can reduce the boiling point. I can't remember which distillery in the UK, but I think Bacardi owns them. But they reportedly distill their gin at -5 degrees Celsius. Well, they're able to, because that boiling point is so low, they're able to collect different aromas and things like that. Well, the opposite is also true. If you distill under higher pressure, oh yeah, awesome. Thanks for putting that up. If you distill under a higher pressure, well, your boiling point goes up and you're gonna naturally extract different things. Oxley gin, thank you, Reed. So we see examples of that all the time, but what we don't see is these too many of these high pressure distillation systems. And the chamber still really was sort of this weird, I think Chuck Cowdery kind of referred to it this way. It's sort of this interim technology between a pot still and a column still. But you know, and I like that he says that, but all due respect to him as well, I think it's a little bit more bizarre than that. Because I don't know if you would go from well, you definitely wouldn't. I don't know if you could engineering wise go from a pot still and then, you know, somehow along the line the chamber still be a natural part of that evolution on your way towards a continuous column. I just, you know, I just don't know if anybody would naturally get there. I'm certainly sure Stein and Coffey and, you know, Blumenthal and all these, you know, the Europeans that were working with continuous distillation techniques, I'm certainly certain they didn't do that. But in any case, the basics are that you have a series of chambers. You have a bottom chamber that we'll name chamber 1. You have a chamber above that, chamber 2, chamber 3, and then if you look at me and Todd's stills, which are essentially the same thing. We've made minor changes to each still, but based on the same design, you'd see a top chamber, but that's more of a preheater. It's not an active distillation chamber. So the bottom chamber basically has a virtually completely dealcoholized beer in it. It also has a direct steam line injected into it. The chamber above it has a very small amount of alcohol in it, maybe no more than 2% at most. And then the top chamber basically has preheated, fully alkalized wash, typically anywhere from 5 to maybe 6.5% for a number of reasons. We have found that you don't want to go too far beyond that. If you try to, you can run, you know, for instance, a 9% ABV wash in it, but it extends the distillation time and it actually causes that preheater to start distilling a little bit, which builds up pressure and, you know, blah, blah, blah. So there's issues there. But in any case, the steam comes into the bottom chamber number 1. That chamber is under very high pressure. The steam often comes in about 4 to 5 psi, which is traditional for the way they ran them back in the day. Blasting steam in, that chamber will start to boil often around 220-ish degrees, 218 to 220, depending on what the pressure is. Well, because that is such a high temperature and a high pressure, you're able to extract compounds out of that you would otherwise not be able to get in a normal distillation system. So the vapors from chamber 1 boil up into chamber 2, passing heat off, and that eventually starts to boil, obviously at a lower temperature and a lower pressure. Chamber 2 begins to boil off, and the vapors boil up into chamber 3. And then eventually chamber 3 begins to boil and the vapors travel up. You can go directly into a condenser, be it traditionally they were worm tubs. They might go into a thumper. There's all kinds of variations. Historically, we've seen examples of 3 chambers being doubled by just going into a pot still in a batch process. There were thumpers, there were 3 chambers without any kind of doubling process. Some people would do a stripping run in a pot still and then use the 3 chamber as a finishing process. So they were never meant to be one thing. But they are largely operated in a batch process, which means you do have heads, parts, and tails components that you're fractioning out. It's just because of the extreme amount of energy that's going into these things, those fractions happen really quickly. Our heads fraction only lasts a few minutes. The hearts run is only a few minutes. The tails run also only a few minutes. We combine the heads and tails at the very end, and then we recycle them into the second chamber. So the chamber just above the bottom one, which sounds a little bit odd, but it is to kind of keep the alcohol levels in that second chamber higher than the first one, and to keep them constant between runs. And these things were historically run at a really rapid clip. we're talking, 18 times a day. They were meant to be run continuously. So that's how we run ours. Now I know Royce doesn't have his installed yet, but I know he's got some really interesting ideas. And his is being designed a little bit differently. So I'll let either one of you guys, if you guys want to chime in on your thoughts on running one, and I'll just shut up for a few minutes.
Yeah, I was once again very fortunate to be able to come up and spend a day with Matt. I can't thank Iron City enough for allowing me to come up there, and that's my first time of ever actually being able to run the chamber still, which was a interesting conversation early on with my father when we were designing it out and we got the price from Vendome. He's like, "All right, so explain to me how you run this," and I'm like, "Well, I'm going to figure that out as we go." And he's like, "Oh, okay, all right, cool, all right." So. One of the things, and what really helped me when I got to go up to Iron City was, and Matt knows this, there's different changes that you can make to that still, just to constantly improve it. And so when I sat down with Vendome, I guess it's probably been 3 weeks ago, I was able to walk them through a lot of the stuff that Matt and I talked about, and they were like, "Wow, this is great. This is the most feedback we've ever got about the chamber still." So I think that's kind of a cool thing to be a part of that as well, and helping Vendome grow and in the way that they're designing their still. For us, we're going to be able to inject in well, I guess you said chamber one was the bottom chamber, right? That's what you're calling it?
Yeah, I'm just keeping it simple. Just
We'll be able to inject in chamber 2 or 3 if we want to off the thumper. We are going to run to a thumper. I know Tom Leonard's on here, one of my tour guides. He knows, we love the thump keg on our pot stills, but I'm also going to be able to bypass the thumper, and we are going to run ours directly over into an old school worm tub. I run worm tubs on both of my finishing stills, both my finishing pot stills. So it just made sense for us to put a worm tub on this one as well. We're going to run the preheater just like you run on yours, Matt, like Todd runs on his. But yeah, I think that we put a manway on the thumper to where we can charge with not only with low wines or heads or tails or feints, but we could put sweet mash in there if we wanted to. We could be able to run. I like to do stuff like that with the thump keg. Or we can, run it dry as well. So a lot of different things we can do with it.
I love that. I'm gonna, that's actually something I want to ask at the very end too. So yeah, hold some of those ideas because there's definitely a lot of interesting things you can do with these. Yeah. So,
If you guys hear me okay, I apologize. I'm on Duval Street in Key West. We're doing the Distillers Summit right now. So there's a bunch of us down here. And I just jumped away and hid somewhere to be able to do the webinar. So can you hear me okay?
I think you're good, man. That's awesome. Yeah, you need a vacation. So.
Don't we all?
Yeah, don't we all, right? Alexandre, what I know because you're running a 2-chamber, which was very much sort of the these obviously came before the 3 chambers, and there were eventually 4 and 5 chamber stills, and I don't know of any examples of those that still exist, but maybe there are some. But you guys obviously have to run yours quite a bit differently. You want to talk about that for a few minutes?
Sure, of course, of course. And by the way, I just want to refer to what you were saying, Matt, before when somebody was saying, and of course, all due respect, and it's something between a pot and a column still, and I would respectfully disagree. To me, what defines a column still is really the fact that it's continuous, and this is, as you know, the term of chamber still was also charged still because they get charged. They're batch. They're really, and that's a major difference. And so to me, if you really had to make an analogy, and that's totally debatable, but I would think it's closer to what you see in the Caribbeans with the. Imagine a retort system, but on top of each other's, right? I mean, of course, again, it's not the same thing, but I would say it's closer. And
I've actually said that to people before that it's a bad analogy, but it is like having a vertical retort system.
Yeah, that's what. Well, I'm glad we agree, but I would say that's what it is. So for us, the design is the same with the bottom still, the bottom chamber, I'm sorry, where you actually put pressure, and we have the same thing. And I really like what you said, Matt, the fact that by applying different pressure, you create, different type of distillates because your boiling point of alcohol is different, right? And we know at atmospheric pressure, boiling point is 78, 37 something Celsius or 173 Fahrenheit. And so in that case, you are right. Since it's under more pressure, your boiling point is at is at at a different point. So you extract different things. My experience with it is that, and maybe we'll come to that later, about flavor profile, but we think it tends to select more of the high alcohols, like the chocolate, gingery, and so on elements. So we do ferment differently. As you know, the Caribbeans, there's a whole way to work yeast and, very long fermentations. We have our own, well, no, Jamaicans call that muck pit. In Barbados, we call that nursery.
Mhm.
So we do this longer fermentation, and we put, of course, the dunder or the vinasse or stillage, right? I think you say in English, right? In the bottom still, right?
Right.
And then we push steam the same way you do, and we have our distilling chamber that's there, and what we put there is the wash, is the wine. So when we make wash, imagine longer fermentation, we're more around 6%, 5% sometimes. When you do a quick fermentation, we're more around 8 or 9, by the way. And then what we do is that what evaporates through goes to what is for us the third chamber, but the third chamber would be, see what you have on your drawing. It's a preheating chamber.
Yeah.
So it's just a pipe going through, which is for energy saving, but also it's smart, right? Since it's called a chamber still, when you go to the next batch, you just have to drop, you end your distillation and you drop. I think it's probably why they were called charged, right? And
Yeah.
charged stills. And then what happens for us is that outside, when the steam, the steaming distillation goes out, it goes into the little reflux system, which is the air-cooled system. This patent. It has like marbles made of glass in it. Is very, very specific. Was built, in 1893, and it's still working. Sometimes we have to resize because it's crying a little sometimes, but we have to resize the pipes and so on. But I'm insisting, every time there's a huge tornado and stuff in the Caribbean's going over, and I know it might hit Barbados, I'm like praying that it's not going to hit our distillery, because you cannot remake history like that, right? And I'm even thinking, should we put it in a bunker or something? Because if it goes, it's going to go forever. And distilleries in the Caribbean, it's always the same weather. So it's just a roof, right? the rest is just, there's barely any walls, right? So it's exposed in scale. So we board it up when there's a storm. And then, so you see it goes to that system, right? It goes at the bottom and then up, and then you see it reflux. Some of it goes through, and some of it is refluxed back into the distilling chamber. I'm sorry, I'm not, I'm very low tech, guys. I just drew what it did as we were talking. I don't know if you see it, but that's what it is. And so it does reflux to the to the distilling chamber, kind of recycling it, and then we distill out. And if we do one distillation like this, we get out at about 50% alcohol, but we use the heads and the tails. So when we load at about 1,000 liter. I think in gallon, 1,000 liters, help me Matt, 265 liters, something like that, gallons. And then we have about 15 liters, that's our heads. And then we have about as much as 300 liters, that's our tails. And we recycle this and we reintroduce this into our wash, and that's what we put into our distillation chamber. Now, we work it many different ways, but that's like a classic way. The other classic way, of that still, so you can see the top chamber is the preheater, but the two other, and so on. And so the other way, you are right, Matt, historically totally correct. And I also want to pay tribute to wonderful historians, but also to Dave Wondrich, the guy that wrote the Oxford Guide to Spirits, very educated, and who, one day I'm going through the archive at Stade's Distillery and West Indies here, and I find that in the 1950s and 100 years before, using seawater in the in fermentation to create some stress to the yeast. And I call him and I'm like, man, I've discovered something you never heard about. And when I told him, he says, oh, Alexandre, I'm going to send you a document from the 1820 about exactly that technique. I love guys like that, that. And of course talk with Digger. But in that case, you see, we have that reflux, and then we distill. So we either have this very strong, very raw distillate that's like 50, 52, And half of the time we run it again, and I use it as a blending element, which is
Yeah.
wonderful because when you want to adds a lot of very structuring element, or we run it a second time, like you would do with a pot. We go again through the system. And we also use it, as you said, 19th century, according to Digger, and his father had told him that when they got educated back then about it, it was used also as a stripping still, for going after that in a pot still. So that's the main ways we use it. And now, depending how we recycle the heads and the tails and how we do fermentation, as you know, in the Caribbean, fermentation is Barbados and Jamaica is a great leverage. So that's what we do. But that's basically what it is in essence. It's a little more complicated because there's a little still next to it. You might have seen there's a little bucket next to it, but that's really basically the way it's being used. It's funny that when we fixed it, I told Digger, I said, we're going to change all the valves and put them on ball bearings, because they look so used to it. And he said, yeah, that's a little side still actually also. And he said, no. And he pulls out that big metal ruler that was all rusted. Remember, there's the Caribbeans. He said, Alexander, I'm very precise. I don't need a computer and I don't need the ball bearing valves. It's all about the tap. And he's tapping on that valve like with little taps on there. And so we didn't have we'd say, okay, let's not jinx it. We kept it as it is, and it's still distilling the same way. The problem we had originally was a lot of leaks, but we have our own welder, so we really came from Cognac and rewelded it with copper. And we think we're going to be able to use it for another 50 years, so that gives us time to build the little sister or the little brother. But we think it's going to do. So it's just, to me, it was just history in reenaction. I thought it was wonderful. And the fact that, yes, this whole Americana piece that we're so proud of, and the fact that it's making rum and it's making rum there, and it's secretly, and nobody was really talking about it. So I feel very honored and pleased to present to everyone here because, yes, in that case, it's not whiskey, but we recognize, obviously, it does come from America, and probably, Prohibition had an influence of, the coppersmiths looking east, looking to the Caribbeans to find new customers and convincing them about the merits of such a technique, in the 1930. That's our read, and anything you find, Matt, on Vulcan, we're very excited to know more. So that's the way we use the Vulcan still, at the Stade Distillery.
And Matt, I think it's important. I think it's important to point out too that from a steam side, and this was very eye opening to me, and I know very eye opening to you, just from your discussions with Vendome. But it's an absolute steam hog.
Oh yeah.
Where let's say a 600-gallon copper pot still uses 400,000 BTUs an hour or something like that. My 100-gallon chamber still, we're projecting 1.2 million BTU an hour steam need on that. So I mean, absolute. A lot of people think they went out of fashion because they were inefficient on the distillation side, like the distillate itself, and the labor side, but it's inefficient all the way around. It's an absolute gas hog. And we're working on what's not a closed system, but an open system. So you're not returning your condensate back to your boiler and being able to reuse it. You're injecting directly into that, which I know that's where you meant when you said like it's like a mixture between both a pot and a continuous still, because you're injecting into it. It's not jacketed. And that was a big question I had when I come up to see you I'm like, are you injected into it or is each chamber jacketed and you're heating it that way? I wasn't sure how that worked.
And that's I mean, you guys both bring up a point, that I wanted to touch on too, is that at the end of the day, you start running one of these things. Our owner hates it when I say this, but I remember he came in one day, he was asking, he's like, "Oh, how's it running?" And he was obviously very proud of it. I said, honestly, on paper, nobody in their right mind would want to run one of these things. They are energetically, they're steam hogs. You need a lot of cooling. You need, and this wasn't Vendome's fault by any means, but they had told us that for our still, they said, oh, you need about 1.1, 1.2 million BTUs an hour, roughly 1,000 pounds of steam per hour running into this thing. And so that's what we had set it up for. And we quickly figured out that we needed at least double that. They're just energetically absolutely insane to run. They require a lot of manual labor. Things happen really quickly. I mean, my desk is set up right in front of the still. I can't leave whenever it's running because things just happen so quickly.
When I that was the big thing when I saw you doing that, Matt. When I saw Todd back in 18, he was like, we
Yeah.
had to put a TV and Netflix over here next to the still.
Yep.
That way I could keep the distillers there the entire time around it.
Yeah.
So for ours,
Yep.
we're going to set the still and build out around it, but we're going to move our distilling office over there right beside of that still so we can babysit it as well.
Yeah, it's really, I mean, even just, for any accountants that might be paying attention, our accountant hates the thing because it's so expensive to run, but it really requires, if you're running a pot still or a column still, you can kind of step away for a little bit. You can go do other things if you need to. You can multitask. You cannot multitask very easily with a chamber still because it is just so demanding of your time and focus. So yeah, on paper, there's no reason why anybody, and that is totally why I believe they fell out of favor, because just no offense to accountants, but they ruin everything. My mother-in-law's an accountant, so she might be in the house right now, but she she laughs at me when I say that, but they are so inefficient with regards to production. But I really believe because of how they operate, you honestly cannot make whiskey or rum or whatever. I mean, Todd Leopold has supposedly put some pear brandy through his. There's a bunch of things that you can do with them, but they just no other still is going to produce distillate quite the same way. So, Alexander, you look like you were about to say something.
No, you make me laugh about one thing. I was laughing because I think you're working on your marriage, man. And love to CPAs, man. We need them. If we don't have them, the dreamers like us cannot go back to work because they no more money. So
Yeah, I'm constantly working on it.
hallelujah to them. But you were funny. So, but we won't tell your mother-in-law. And so, just a question for you, Matt. What percentage? This is, I don't know how you say in English. We call it la température de coulage, the running water of the running liquid, the running. What is at what temperature? In Celsius or Fahrenheit, do you have the whiskey running out of your cooler, of your either tub or cooler? Is it something you work on? Because for us, it's something that's important in that still. And it's as you know, because if you have a high running temperature, you're going to lose some of the elements at that point unless you have a very, very close safe. And so the cognac has to be 19 Celsius by law and stuff. So I just was wondering, because we didn't touch on that last time, and I was just questioning. I forgot to ask you that question.
No, that's a great question because we had to kind of dial some of that in a little bit.
Yeah.
It was interesting because we didn't have our sister company is Pittsburgh Brewing Company, and it's a fairly large regional brewery, one of the top producing breweries in the country, actually. And so they have an immense amount of utilities available. So we did pipe our cooling lines over from the brewery, which is just 20 feet away from us in the next building. So we have more cooling load than we could possibly ever use.
Cool.
We just recently, we're in the process of piping one of their high pressure boiler systems over to become more efficient and make the 3-chamber a bit more manageable. But no, I know especially in cognac too, you guys talk about that as well, like the temperature of the distillate coming off, and that's absolutely important for us. What we do is we have, because we're running through the thumper, we do have a pre-condenser on top of the thumper. It's not a very efficient one. It's not meant to be. But it's just enough to give a little bit of reflux and some separation out of the thumper. So we kind of start with that, usually with that turned on at about 100%. And then once we see the thumper really hitting hard and things are starting to really boil and really go nuts in there, that's where we start kind of dialing that down a little bit. Usually we end up having it set around 70% cooling. And then we have the distillate come over. The distillate coming off of the still for us is usually, I mean, we try to stick around 20 degrees Celsius, somewhere in there. So roughly 68 degrees Fahrenheit. It's going to be, give or take. We,
Yeah,
we
yeah, yeah,
change
yeah.
this a little bit,
Yeah.
but we try to be in that ballpark.
And
Um,
that's classic, right? And the
yeah,
guy in Barbados, what we do, we run it at higher. We're more like 90, but
yeah,
that's more typical, as you know, of a Caribbean way of distilling, right? Like when you come
sure.
from, that's where I always think, when you go from one region to the other, part of the culture is how you run a still, and if you arrive and say, I'm the cognac guy, we're gonna do it the cognac way,
Yeah,
then you lose a lot, in
yeah,
process. Now, there are stills that, but also remember you're in tropical climate, so there's also
yeah,
the fact that the historical the heritage is about distilling having a running temperature that's higher, and that's part
yeah.
of the heritage in people may do and then design beautiful rums that way. And so if you have a typical cognac guy arriving, and as you know, cognac is about 19 Celsius. I don't know what's in
Hmm.
Fahrenheit, but and we are like, we're not twice as much, but almost, or
Yeah,
80% more. So and I feel that what happens, you lose some of the esters, lighter like ethyl acetate and more volatile elements. Yet, so to me, it seems that it stresses more some of the chocolate, ginger, gingery,
yeah,
gingerbread elements. I think that has something to do with it. We never tried to cool it lower because we're using it as it was used 100 years ago. We're not changing this process. If we built another one later, we'll tweak it, but we keep it as it was originally. And I think that has also an influence on the flavor. I always find that a few degrees difference of your running temperature, especially if you kind of exposed when the liquid comes out with pot still and makes a huge difference. I don't know if you're familiar, there's a system called the Stuffler, where it is a reflux with a double skin in the neck
yeah.
and then the honeycomb, inside. That
Hmm.
running temperature also super important. And I would argue, but that's totally debatable. I said that very modestly. Remember, you're talking about distilling fruits.
Yeah,
Seem to think that actually fruits taste more like the fruit when they distilled at a lower pressure, lower temperature,
I agree. Yeah,
than cooking as much. After it tastes more like jam, which is great too,
yeah.
right? But it was just my finding because we we tried one day, with fruits in the uh, in the uh, in the chamber still, and that was our finding. You had something more jamming, than if you use fruit, for example, in a stuffler with like a single distillation pot still with a very efficient reflux system where you don't need as much energy and don't cook as much. So I think it really depends what you want to distill. And what you said earlier, I totally agree. What flavor profile you want, and yet it is cost energy, but that I so agree with what the both of you, what Royce and you said, that these profiles you cannot get anywhere else.
Yeah.
So if I'm trained as master blender, and if you want to do that painting that's usually like Van Gogh, all these different colors, these colors you cannot, am I finding, and I'd love to be proven wrong, and I totally admit it if I am, you cannot find any other way. So I think this is great also, not only to drink on its own, and I totally agree and second you when you say it is not about finesse. It's about
No.
it's making a sculpture with a chainsaw, like
Yeah.
instead of using a chisel. And yet it's just got this beautiful, full-bodied, very gutsy type of rums that are incredible either to blend or to drink on their own. And that's what I would describe it. And to have it there, I think it's incredible.
I know my master blender Jackie Zykan is incredibly excited about having it as a blending agent down the road. And I know I talked to you guys about like we'll definitely put out a Kentucky Straight 3 chamber bourbon or something like that on its own product line. But just to have it to be able to throw into some hidden barn batches, like if we have a batch that might be a little bit flat on the finish, I think you could get some real heavy 3 chamber and be able to batch that in.
Yeah.
And really, I mean, I think it, like you said, Alexander, it just adds. If you had a palette of paint, you just added a whole nother side of colors that you can now add into your painting. That's a great way to describe it.
It absolutely is. I mean, they are they're such funny stills. I mean, and how they behave and what they end up producing. What we have noticed, and speaking a lot to what Alexander just said, but they are very heavy distillates. They're incredibly heavy. So, typically we judge the heads cut. Usually by volume and by time. It only takes a few minutes, and we're not cutting that much out. But the hearts runs for a little bit, and then we'll usually cut the tails when the distillate coming off of the still is right around 58% alcohol. Traditionally, if you look at some of the old manuals and documents around it, it would have been 56. We just, for our purposes, we like it a little bit, just a shade higher. But at the end, you wind up with this incredibly dense, rich distillate, and it's wild when you look at the heads and tails combined, and you are extracting so much. You're literally extracting oil out of the grains or the raw materials. We look inside the tank, and you'll see at the end of the run there'll be little oil droplets sitting on top of the distillate, little brown oil. I mean, it's just really wild looking. And you're not pulling, a lot of that oil is getting separated out into some of the different fractions. But you are getting some of it. You are getting some of it. And one of the things we like to do with folks when they come in is we'll let them try the same recipe done on our pot still versus our chamber still. We'll let them smell and taste, but we also let them feel it too. Rub some between their fingers, and it's slick. It's oily, and it's really wild. Some people, I think Todd Leopold's talked about this, that it's really aggressive, can be really funky right off the get-go. Like but it's ugly, but it's your child. You love it, right? But that it's just going through this very early awkward phase, and it's going to grow up into this it really is kind of screaming out for a barrel, is what we've said with folks. Sam Conlenick, I remember having him taste it, and he was like, "This is just crying for a barrel," but he was like, "This tastes like the grain. This is what I imagine, rye tasting like," and so. Really exciting. John, you just came on, so I assume you want to tell us to shut up.
No, not at all. Not at all. There's just a question that I wanted to throw in that came in. The question is, can you guys speak more on thermal decomposition, which is a hallmark of the still design? And are there any emerging theories of what high-value aromas are created? So that's your two-part question I just wanted to throw in before it got away from us.
It's something chemically that has been looked at in the past. Unless Todd's done it, and I don't know if he'd talk about it, but I don't know if anybody's looked at it recently. That is, we're very fortunate with our company that we have a fully kitted out quality control lab. So we are talking about running. We've just got to come up with a good method for it, but. Yeah, running some of the distillate through GC, both pot still and 3-chamber distillate to just kind of see. I can tell you just organoleptically, sensorially, it is intensely, on the rye side anyway, it is intensely floral. You are getting and there's some research about beta damascenone, which tends to wind up more in the tails fractions. It is definitely getting pulled into the heart fraction much easier. Now, some people might say, "Oh, well, it sounds like you're just running the still really fast. Couldn't you replicate this on a pot still?" Once again, no, we've run our pot still really quickly, and it is not the same character. Alexander, I know you've got some things to say on this as well.
Well, yeah, for me, it's a bit different. So first, for us, we tend to find not as much of these floral notes that we work with another still, and that's interesting. And because we find that so much heat, so much pressure tends to volatile,
Sure.
volatile some of them, especially at the point where, and remember, we have a running temperature higher than you, but we find more of the higher alcohol. I don't know how you call them in English, but
Yeah.
isobutanol, we say, and for example, and so for us, think about the more chocolatey, gingery, notes, and then they're very raw, and they do cry for a barrel. And so that's very funny you're saying this because there's a big discussions about the barrels. Remember when in the 1930s, I think it's 1930s, correct me if I'm wrong, bourbon has to be aged, I believe, in new barrels, right?
Mhm.
We know this because in our archives at the distillery in Barbados, I don't know if you realize, but it changed the world of spirits, by the way,
Oh, yeah.
because suddenly you got all these hundreds of thousands of barrels, or tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands, and literally right now millions of barrels, like 4 millions being made available every year and being recycled. So you have the debates. I knew about the cognac debates back then because every region looked at it. So the Scotch are like, and the Irish are like, yes, thank you very much, because it was a secondary use. And the cognac guys are like, no, 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 we're sticking to the European barrels. And I don't want anybody to say this is the French. And then, and then, more seriously, what happened in Barbados, there was a huge debate. And where there were even, I could show you when you come, there's like this debate, it's written, there's minutes about that debate where they were saying, should we age Barbados rum, in Barbados? And use these barrels to use them. And I know it's a slight digression, but I thought it'd be interesting since we're talking about barreling because before most people in the Caribbean were using vats,
Yeah.
and it's fully documented. And I actually reintroduced vats. There were just 20 years ago. There was a whole bunch at West Indies Rum Distillery, and I don't know if you know by law, cognac can be aged in vats as well. We use many different size of barrels going
Hmm.
and some of them are vats. When it becomes older and stuff, a vat is a little more gentle, and so we thought, and then there's that debate, and I remember one guy, it was the older guy, says, no, but wait a minute, aging it too long in Americano is going to be a corruption of the rum itself. When you see debates, you always, people calling them the purists, you have to be careful because what is the purist, right? What is the
Yeah.
purist?
Yeah.
Because this guy thought he was the purist, right? Like, he's like, this is not what we used to do. Now, in the old days, barrels were fixed in the Caribbeans with local wood as well, right? So we
Yeah.
have a document that shows that they use mango tree wood to fix barrels or mastic wood
Oh,
and things like that. And remember, you fix a barrel with any hardwood that you had that you knew that
yeah.
would be food grade, right? And there's six type of woods that were used at that distillery. And I thought it was very fascinating. And I thought to myself, we should start restudying that. So I tried. You still have coopers in cognac that use different type of wood. I'm working on a book now actually, and I have a whole chapter about this. And I've experienced many type of woods. And the chamber still rum to me works the best. I have some distilled in 2017, aged in chestnut barrels because
Yeah.
chestnut, barrels tend to have sweet, nice, delicate notes, but they're strong. They will withstand that, and it makes an incredible rum. I have a double aged in cognac that way of the first drops of that still, and I find it magical. You know, and anybody is interested here listening, there are these barrels still available. I don't know. I'm sure they make it in America too. And Cognac's got coopers, who still do these barrels. And listen to this, you're gonna think we're crazy. In 1989, these barrels were made illegal in Cognac, and they've been legal for
Yeah.
400 years. They could only use. I'm trying to change this, by the way. That's why I make some friends, and because to just go back to these special barrels. But the beauty about rum is we can actually still use them. So I just wanted
Yeah.
to touch on that point. That to me is still, is is that and is important. And John, I don't know if you want me to jump on the question because I'm looking at it. In that case, I insist this is a very, very, very important question. These are thank you. I don't know who's that good.
Ah, perfect.
This is a wooden vat. They are wooden vats for sure. The aging in cognac can only be made in wood. and it was wood, and there was chestnut, acacia, mulberry, and cherry tree wood until 1983. They were taken out of the regulation then, and obviously I'm trying to reintroduce them, and a few other companies agree to this. This is typically a vat that's a vat used for white rum. We call it the beach vat because on the beach at the distillery, and where it's actually resting there, for 3 to 6 months, and it's used as an infinity vat. Some people call them Solera vat. So you bleed 2/3 of it, you bottle that, and then you reblend, and then you let it sit 3 to 6 months, and you bleed, you taste. If you like it, you blend it, and then you bleed 2/3, and so on and so forth. And when you've been doing this for like the 30 years, you'll be surprised when you take the vat or you empty it fully. There's sometimes funny things at the bottom of the vat, but usually it's okay. And so this is the infinity vat. So that's what it is. So I just wanted to chime in terms of that still to me uses with different type of woods, since it's a still that's like no others. I think it's kind of cool to study different type of wood as well, for that, for sure. And even if you don't have a cooper on site who's willing to do it, if you have a good carpenter, or if you're yourself very handy, you can just change the caps of your barrels and you store them sideways, and that's already 22 to 25% of your wood content if you just change the caps. And if you want to, in Barbados, we're reintroducing cooperage 20 years ago. So I forgot to tell you, I'm sorry, I'm a little long, but in 1930s, we start a cooperage unit in Barbados. I was not born in Barbados. So finally, the revolutionary wins, the purist guy loses. And they buy this hooper from Buffalo, New York, that we still have. Royce, when you come, you'll see, so you can still put the hoops with that piece of equipment. That's from 1930s as well. And so I thought it was kind of cool. But if you recap your barrels with wood, you just have to make sure the wood is food grade and it's available in internet, or for example, don't make your caps of a barrel from mahogany because you will kill people, but use food grade woods, and that they are documented, and that's kind of cool. And if you want, like, I believe they should be toasted and not charred. And if you don't have the equipment, and if you have a friend with a good pizzeria, at the end of service, when he's finished with his pizzeria, you can actually toast your caps of your barrels in the pizzeria. That's what we do when we don't have a coopers. That's we train as master blenders. But just sorry for the digression, but I wanted to touch on this since you did, Matt. Said it cries for aging. I will agree with you totally. I think it does. Probably also because we tend to have some of the tail elements, that necessitate aging. And I wanted to dive in about the type of barrels that could be used for this, that I think would be great.
Oh, absolutely. No, thank you for that. I think you touched on actually what I wanted to talk about next. So what I kind of thought we would do here is maybe tackle this next question for just a few minutes, and then since we have about 20 minutes left, maybe spend the last 10 minutes we can answer questions and things like that if anybody has anything. But what I wanted to talk about last was something you and both you and Royce have kind of edged into during this conversation. What are some of the things that, and let's start with you, Royce. What are some of the things that you're really excited about trying with this? Because I think that, in a lot of ways, these are really rudimentary, very simple stills. I mean, it is a lot like just swinging a sledgehammer around, but there's a lot that you can do with them. There's a lot of things, I think, just innovation-wise, there's some really cool things that can be done here. So, I mean, is there anything you feel comfortable sharing, talking about? I mean, I know you're pretty much an open book like the rest of us are, but I don't want anybody, for you to feel uncomfortable, like to steal ideas. So.
I mean, and like you said, there's so many. It's like one of those things. What's that old saying? It's an old country saying, like, there's different ways to skin a cat type of deal.
Yeah.
There's just so many different ways to run this still. I know I'm definitely thrilled. Now the TTB has got the American single malt defined. We can use used oak. So I'm like, man, what an opportunity now to start making single malts on that 3-chamber. not only for blending components for an overall, but just to be able to have a 3-chamber single malt American single malt whiskey in our used oak. That's definitely something we're going to do. We are going to definitely play around. I have a double retort still, 100-gallon double retort still that I've always used. And I put high tails in one, thumper and low tails in the other one, and make a little rum there that we've got aging as well. We're talking 4 barrels a year, not much. But we're definitely make a little bit of rum as well. My rum, I try to, do 35-day fermentations and stress the yeast out. And it's whatever I can do to try to create as much ester as we can there in Kentucky. So definitely going to do that as well. We'll do all of our apple brandies. My plan is to do all of our apple brandies on the 3-chamber. Also, we do about 10 barrels of apple brandy a year. Once again, not a lot. Probably move all of that off the pots and over to the 3-chamber. But yeah, like I said, I like thumpers a lot. So, putting some sweet mash in the thumper, or putting, some different types of mixtures of feints inside of the thumper, and then seeing how the distillate comes out. One thing I was going to touch on a little bit earlier too is we don't use a chiller on site. So that's going to be an experiment that I hadn't really thought of as much. That's going to be interesting for us because our distillate definitely changes between what we run in the summer to the winter because we cool naturally. So in the summertime, we come off probably like Barbados, 80, 90 degrees Fahrenheit, somewhere around in there, temperature-wise coming off. Right now, it's -5 in Kentucky. I'm colder. I'm colder than most. My water's colder than most chillers are. Like we got to watch and make sure the condensers don't expand and crack and things like that. So that's going to be an interesting thing for us to experiment with as well. Is that ambient temperature of the distillate coming out of that worm? Did I lose you?
I'm still here. I see you. I think we lost Matt.
No, I'm here.
Sorry, Matt.
I'm here. It's all good. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
I think it's. Yeah, I saw the question. I thought it was interesting to have a higher all raw material was a great idea. I think.
I can talk to that. I don't know, Royce. You'll probably. I would imagine you'll do something along these lines too. But we do make a bit of bourbon with Iron City as well, and we use different heirloom corns and things like that. So I that is sort of the plan. Hopefully in the next couple of weeks we'll actually start running a couple different. We use Bloody Butcher. We've used Wapsie Valley in Minnesota 13. We've got some Hickory King coming in. So, we're talking about playing around with a couple different corns and things just to lay a few barrels down and see what happens. I think that's definitely something we're kind of excited about. And certainly running some single malt on it too. Yeah.
We run we grow some Bloody Butcher and some Jimmy Red on the farm.
Yeah.
And we use those a lot of times as sister grains in our rye whiskey.
Sure.
And so we'll definitely do some of that on the 3-chamber also. We have done some Hickory King as well. I don't get as much Hickory King, but I'm excited to try. I mean, once again, tie into Pennsylvania. Dick Stowe was a great mentor of mine, and being able to tie in and use some of that rose and rye. A couple recipes on that 3-chamber. We're definitely going to try that as well, as long as Laura hooks me up with it. So Robert McDonald's a fantastic farmer. So
that's our farmer. We've been running pretty much. We've run a little bit of Danko rye on ours, but it's pretty much been entirely rosin. And we've been really pleased with it. So, Alexandre, what ideas are? I know you've got a lot of ideas.
What we did. What I did. I thought was interesting. Barbados. My first trip there, I was really young, and I had read about the sugarcane breeding station. So, think about it. You guys are familiar with the phylloxera in Europe. When all of the vineyards in France were attacked by parasites that was attacking the roots, and all the vineyards, you have to think, hundreds of thousands of acreage, millions actually throughout Europe were wiped out. And in the end, they realized that actually you needed to plant roots that were resistant to that. So at the same time, it's very interesting, by the way, for the story, but I'm just throwing this out there. But the roots that was the most adapted to the Cognac land is actually from Denison, Texas. And, and so actually the whole Cognac region, was back to life in the late 1800s, thanks to Denison, Texas, and a guy called Charles Manson. So it's interesting how different countries interact, and that was wonderful. And we pay tribute. We have a portrait of him at the domain. And but to go back to this, West. So people don't know this, but there was parasites that had a similar effect on the cane in the Caribbean at the same time. In the 1970s, and cane was wiped out throughout the Caribbean in the 1870s. I apologize. And there's a genius guy called Mr. Bovell, and he's actually on the $2 bill in Barbados. It's actually, Royce, when you go to Barbados, get a $2 bill. It's good luck. It's good luck for distillers, we always say,
I'll
because you
make
got
sure
that.
I do that. I'm so excited you
Yeah.
have no idea, Alexander, how excited I am to get down there.
So you'll see that $2 bill is the good luck bill because it's the guy that saved the day for rum and sugar. And it's actually his work was based on somebody earlier that was a worker in a plantation a long time before, but that's not subject today. And so when I was a kid there, basically probably 25, 26, I had read about this sugarcane brewing station, and I thought I was gonna meet like scientists, with like lab equipment, and they do. There's a little lab, and there's a man called Mr. Kennedy. I call him the cane druid, dressed like, and he's from Irish origin, and he's there, and he's wearing flip-flops, in the lab, and he shows me there's three different varieties of cane. And sometimes I'm sure all of you, distillers, you have your dreams, and sometimes they be a little crazy, and you're like, you don't want to voice them out because everybody is going to think you're a nut. And so I hope one day I work with these guys, and I'm so privileged we ended up working with them. So we put, now fast forward, a little cane mill there, and so for the five or fifth years, 6 years actually, we've been, Eric has been there. We've been crushing different cane and distilling different cane varieties, and to go back to the chamber still that was using, as you know, molasses is the historical rum, and all this reference to rums. Barbados is 1650, and we decided to distill juice with it. So we distilled juice from different cane varieties. It is totally different than what you think of a juice rum, but it's really, really interesting because imagine it's almost, cane juice is usually more grassy and so on. Not and then so here
Yeah.
you get, imagine it's almost, I think it's like music. This is more about the bass than it's about the high notes, right? And so you get this
Yeah.
bass. Imagine, when somebody is listening to music a little too loud with their cars, and you hear the bass as they go by. I think that's the rum we produce with that, like this big bass that shakes you. And so, but yet I thought it was really interesting to do this. And the one I loved the most was actually a 2/3 molasses and 1/3 cane juice, and we use the cane juice to dilute the molasses and add a little water and make the wine and so on and so forth with the long fermentation. And remember, in Barbados, Jamaica, at the end of the fermentation, we grow specific bacteria that feed off acidity and alcohol to create more esters, and then we put it in there. So that's the innovations we did that we thought were a lot of fun, to try with, and we're actually, cane season is soon, so we do it every year, with different cane varieties and things, and different type of molasses. We feel that we get much better results with blackstrap molasses, like the super, because the more impurities you have in molasses, a lot of people will tell you if you have a low quality sugar mill, you'll make high quality molasses. And I disagree actually, because actually it's better when you have a very extracted, that's where the sugar mill is and the cane varieties. Man,
Nice.
you're impressive, Eric. That's the mill, and that's a Ram. Ram, the man you see here, he says, I don't have blood in my veins, I have sugarcane juice. And that his family's been there. And if some of you know a distillery yeah, he was working at the distillery. He's from Trinidad called Caroni. And, when Caroni closed, he came to work in Barbados and I was working with us. So anyway, to say this, so all these experiments super interesting. And so we like to use the molasses actually that are quite extracted in sucrose, because we don't think the flavor is in sucrose, but in the other elements. So actually, and then we can use different type of molasses, A, B, and even syrup. And in our case, we like to do that with the chamber still, to use these blackstrap molasses. So just extra interesting flavors and nutrients, from all these elemental impurities that are not just sucrose.
I love it. Well, we only have a few minutes left. I think we can open it up to one, two, or maybe even three questions, depending on how it goes. I don't know, John, if we have anything going on question was, or
Matt, can I just say something before, as John's gonna
oh,
gather
absolutely.
information? I just want to say something, and in front of everybody. I know we kind of touched on it last time we talked. I was thinking for all the listeners, and I don't know how many listeners are, but I like to share, and you guys said you would agree, and I hope you didn't change your mind. And if you
Oh, I have
did,
not.
Matt and Royce, I'd be pissed off if you guys would agree that we make our, we've been aging it for a long time, but we have some
Yeah,
barrels when we empty, and we should do a barrel swap, when the
we will.
barrels are empty. So you're using my rum chamber still barrels, when they're empty, you ship them to you, and you make a whiskey, and then I'll make a rum with your whiskey barrels that is distilled in these chamber stills for us to make a beautiful thing. And then maybe I think every listener, Eric, I'm going to put you to work here if you agree. Everybody should be listed here, and there will be a list at the distillery. Then when you come, give us 18 months, I am sure, to make all of this, and you'll be able to taste that barrel that we talked about today.
Yeah.
If you guys are game, we'll do that. And Eric, if you don't mind, or John, keeping tap of that. And because I love to share what we're creating. So if you guys have barrels, we'll buy them and we'll put them in Barbados, or we'll swap them for you for chamber still barrels, rum barrels that you can use for your whiskeys. I think be fun.
I think that's a great idea.
I mean, unless the listeners don't want to do this.
No, they probably do. I mean, who knows,
Listen, I'm looking forward to drinking it. I can't do anything else to help you out, but if you need a royal taster or something, I'd be happy to throw my hat in the ring. So, Matt, to your point,
you're more than welcome.
to your point, if anybody's got any last minute questions they want to throw up there, anything that you want to know more about, anything that you were curious about that didn't get covered, please hit us up. We got a couple minutes left, and I'll either pitch it to the fellas or they can see the chat. I just didn't want them to get bogged down and trying to do two things.
I got my $2 bill here with yeah.
Good day, man. Good luck for you.
Alexander a little more love. He's got this book, Exploring 300 Years of Royal Navy Rum and Its Techniques, written with Matt Pietrick. I hope we can get some copies of this at the conference. And I think you also did this rum with that, which is Mr. Fogg.
Yeah.
And it's $35 a bottle. Absolutely exceptional. I think everybody here should go out and taste this Navy strength rum. And it's there doesn't seem to be any questions here. So I don't know.
We got one more. Zach just asked. He says, with these stills utilizing so much energy, do you know of current energy sustainability practices or efforts as the technology is reemerging, as chamber stills, show some roadworthiness for coming back? So, do you know of any current sustainability practices to address that? And are there any energy sustainability practices out there that would make the three chamber still more appealing for distillers to invest in and to begin to use?
Because there's only a handful of them in operation right now. I'm not aware of anything. Now, I'm not an engineer. There are certainly ways to go about saving energy on these things. I'm not an expert in that area, so I can't really speak to it.
Matt,
maybe Alexander or Royce have ideas.
Yeah, I can jump in. I think it's an important question because you see right now in Cognac, for example, where direct flame is part of the law. And and I've really looked at soul searching about this, because we realized it was 30% or 25% more energy. So this is where you have a planet there, and you have a taste profile. So you're a master distiller, but you also are a citizen, right? So you're looking at these issues. So I think it's a valid question. And believe it or not, and again, the law in Cognac, if you violate it and you're found out, you go to jail for 5 months, and nobody likes this. So we need to evolve that law. And I'm proud to say that right now the whole group has been working on it for 10 years. And then distilling with steam coil will be available. We did a lot of blind tastings, believe me, for 10 years, and a lot of back and forth and a lot of argument, obviously, but I think we're progressing. Now, the energy to distilling is something that's really important, and we all care about this, whether it's actually pot still or as well, because if you think that way, a pot still is energy less efficient than a column still. So should we stop pot stills as well, or should we think about differently? It's really something we thought about, because imagine cognac by law has to be pot still. So do we change everything, or and I think our duty as distillers is really to think, how can we keep these precious flavors that we love to work with to make people's life a little better, by tasting beautiful things, but yet being responsible. And so what we're working on at West Indies Rum Distillery, and it's a lot of money, but we are going to now we did 5 years of research and auditing, is to do a methanization of our vinasse, and create biogas and distill from that. Now what we do also is some of the heads, when we make the lighter rums, we don't recycle and distilling, so we can burn the heads, but that's not really the answer to the question. So in that case, we are looking at that possibility, and now we have decided on that possibility to team up with an energy company to do this. Also, in Barbados, there's a lot of tourism, as you know, so there's a lot of waste cooking oils, and so we're adapting our boiler to be able to do this. Otherwise, it was go in a drain, and then if you use these cooking oils, you can actually, they're very energetic, and use them for distilling. So these are issues that all of us, of course, I know, care about, and we're looking at that. It's kind of a new frontier. It's tough because it's a lot of money. So for family businesses, I'm sure a lot of people here listening are family businesses. It's our own money, and so that's why we never have cash. I think if you're a distiller, right, you have to be ready to never have any cash, but have a pretty good fund. And so, yes, this is something that we're looking at. I don't know how more efficient can you make it. Probably you could make it more efficient by insulating it. I think Matthew would agree with it if we start insulating. But I think the percentage of saving of energy, because you need more energy, why you need more energy is because you're pushing steam. And if you're pushing steam, you create the opposite of vacuum, right? And so
Right.
and so you have more pressure, and more pressure, your atmospheric pressure prevents evaporation, so you create an evaporation point that's actually higher. And if you change this, then you don't have a vacuum still anymore in terms of profile. So I think it's more about looking. And I saw somebody saying that they're using old staves to create energy and biomass, and hallelujah. I think it's a great way. I think we need to be creative with these alternatives, because we don't want to cut corners on the beauty of taste, but we need to find alternative energy. So that would be my way. And I was at Arbiki in Scotland. They have a huge wind turbine, and now they were able to distill all with wind. And I think a good shout out to them. So that I wanted to say this. And Eric, by the way, thank you for the shout out for the book. But
I think I think you're right. I think you can't, with these stills, you can't change anything necessarily on the back end. It really has to be sort of how the steam is produced. And so, if you're running other stills and you have a lot of stillage, pot ale, things like that you can run into, say, an anaerobic digester or something, and these are big upfront capital expenditures. They're not cheap, right? They're not meant to be, but over time they do have an ROI on them. And so, I think there's definitely ways to do it. I would certainly not claim that any of them are particularly easy. But to Alexandre's point, I mean, we want to try to maintain the flavor of the distillate, and preserve the character of what we're trying to do. But at the same time, we are all citizens, and you try to do your part. Royce, I know you've got comments on this as well.
I'm just gonna say, the first thing that popped into my head was obviously you can insulate it. But can you imagine, the still's so beautiful? Can you imagine just covering all that insulation? Like, it just hurts the soul.
I know. This is because of how these stills operate. This is one of the few stills I think you can get away with insulating without changing the character of the distillate. I've seen some people say, "Oh, well, I'll insulate my pot still." Well, yeah, you can do that, but it will change how your pot still behaves. So whether or not that's a good or a bad thing is entirely, up to the person doing it. But I've had people in our company that didn't really understand the concept is, how it worked. We're like, oh, well, why don't we, we could save some energy. Why don't we insulate the pot still? I'm like, one, you don't want to do that. It's going to look ugly. But also, it'll completely change everything. This is the type of still you could definitely do it. But yeah, they're gorgeous. So it does kind of sadden me a little bit to think about it.
Matt, on these, I feel that for pot stills, we found that if you insulate the liquid part, the liquid phase of your still, it's a problem if you insulate it could be a problem if you, I think you will agree with this, if you insulate the vapor phase, because obviously the vapor is where it condensates. But I think if you insulate the liquid phase, your pot itself, which a lot of heat can be wasted, it's
absolutely
a positive thing. So that would be my argument. If you have a farm next to you guys, I have a friend in next to Alsace in France. He has a farm, a cow farm, a cow farm where the guys are making milk, and so the guy has started methanizing all his cow manure, and then he's using his vinasse with it, and then cow manure is very easy to make biogas with. And so and he's a small distillery, so for him it was like capex was crazy, but he was able to convince the cow guy and say, okay, I'll give you my vinasse, and then I'll get some of the gas and I'll buy it. So sometimes if you have a ambitious farmer that has cows next to you, in terms of doing the things that way, that also a distillery can tag on to this. And the distillery in France called Roselier, who's doing it, and shout out to him. He's partnered with a farmer to do that. So there's many different ways, and he's basically distilling with the gas made from cow manure and his vinasses, and I think he deserves a shout out.
Love that. So it looks like we're kind of at the end of our time here. I know I have to run here in a second, but I think it is worth mentioning that Alexandre, as Eric said earlier, is going to be the keynote speaker in San Antonio this year. That, Alexandre, as you know, you're kind of one of my heroes. That's a really exciting thing.
Well, thank you.
But it sounds like we are also going to continue this panel there live, and if we can, and don't hold us to this, if we can figure it out, because Texas has some odd rules about serving liquor and things like that, we may, fingers crossed, we may be able to bring samples of new make and things like that for people to compare and stuff like that. I will also be giving a talk on how we run ours at Iron City. So I think hopefully everybody enjoyed it. I don't know. Do you guys have anything else that you want to add, or?
See you guys.
No, man.
I think that was it. I just want to add much love to Royce for being in Key West while it's 4 degrees here in Virginia. Way to rub it in.
Yeah, I'm getting ready to go do the Duval crawl out here. So
I love it.
Good luck with that. I hope you brought your extra liver.
I just want to say thank you to everybody for being here today. Thank you so much. I think we're all pursuing a dream, right? With the still, and I think it's a wonderful thing, and love to share every time. Also, great thanks to American Distilling Institute. I know that you guys for many, 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 many years, and I love the passion for sharing. So I'm always ready, to do this for sure with great pleasure. So, and anytime you're in Barbados, or I know Royce is coming, or in Cognac, please let us know. We'd be happy to open the doors and show you around. A distiller to a distiller, that'd be my pleasure for sure.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.